woman was selling gas for 89 cents a gallon. Once word got
Oh, I'm
out,
loving the price.
Yeah.
Get a delicious, big, and tasty a McChicken sandwich and
Yeah.
more every day on McDonald's.
Yeah,
Dollar
a
Menu.
low price. Every. Yeah. 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 Oh. Oh, thank God. It was just a dream. Oh, for a second there, I thought they might be the middle class again. Oh. Hello and welcome to Econ and Decon. I appreciate you joining me here for another episode. We just finished a 3-part inflation series plus a little bonus video on inflation, so it's only fair that we look at the other side of the coin, the dreaded deflation. We've spent a lot of time in the last few videos talking a lot about how ridiculous it is for people to be afraid of falling prices. But in the interest of fairness, we do need to talk about deflation a little bit more in depth because it's not a panacea. Deflation is not good all the time for everybody. We'll spend the first half of this video talking about the different types of deflation and where it can come from. And then in the second half, we'll tackle specifically some arguments against deflation, some of the reasons that you were told to fear it. So without further ado, let's dig right into exactly where deflation comes from and what are the different types. Because some of them are pretty good and some of them are not pretty good. Now, in order to understand the different causes of deflation, we have to go back to our old friend MV equals PQ, the old trusty equation of exchange. If you don't recognize this, go back to the first Inflation Part 1 video that I did, where we really dug into this in depth in order to understand inflation, but it works the opposite way too. This also describes in many ways prices falling and where it comes from. So to start with, there is M deflation. This is prices going down as a result of money being sucked out of the system, of the money supply, the overall money supply in the economy going down. Now, this is not a commonly seen type of deflation. Even when the money supply goes down, it is usually only a result of banks trying to slow down inflation. It doesn't actually generally achieve deflation in this country, or at least it hasn't for the last 80 years. But M deflation is not good. Okay, it's number one, it's not something you generally see in a free market. Economies on gold standards, the gold supply generally goes up by 1 to 2% every year. Gold doesn't tarnish, it doesn't spoil. The gold supply doesn't really go down. But nowadays, you do see monetary deflation sometimes. It is mostly a sign of trouble. It is mostly something you see when banks, central banks especially, but also governments recognize that inflation is running too hot, or maybe there are too many projects that have been started and not enough resources to actually complete all these projects. So the money supply going down is not a good thing. At the time of this filming in 2024, we're seeing a little bit of this. The Federal Reserve is trying to suck some money out of the system, although that money is being replaced by the Treasury, so we're not really seeing it. But it is a response to inflation to the extent that they're doing it. Similarly, we raised the interest rates and started reducing the Federal Reserve balance sheet in the time period between 2016 and 2019. And it started to crash the economy. A lot of people don't know that, but in late 2019, before the COVID pandemic even happened, the economy was starting to really break down. And it was breaking down because the money supply was being sucked out of the economy, and much of the economy was built around the existing money supply and the cheap interest rates. So M deflation, the money supply going down, is not a good type of deflation. It is generally a reaction of banks and central banks and governments to too much inflation, but it is not something you really see in a free market setting or in a gold standard economy. Next, we have V deflation. This is velocity deflation. So again, MV equals PQ. V is velocity. How much is the same dollar changing hands within a given year? How fast is the money moving through the economy? When V goes down, it is typically because people don't have money to spend. They are either over indebted and trying to pay down debt, or they just don't have enough money to afford things. There are more dollars, but they're able to spend less of it on discretionary items. They feel like they have to tighten their wallets. That's what V is telling us. V deflation is a bit of a double-edged sword. What I mean by that is when velocity goes down, it is generally a sign that the economy is bad. People don't feel rich. It is a symptom of a bad economy. But prices going down as a result of velocity going down is part of the cure of the free market. This is part of what makes things better. People don't feel rich. They don't have enough money. The economy is bad. They can't afford houses or food or whatever their discretionary items they want, cars, toys. They can't afford it. So they stop spending money. V goes down. It pulls prices down with it. And when prices go down, all of a sudden people feel a little richer. They can afford a little bit more, and it brings V back up.
Oh, I'm loving the price. Gotta take advantage of it.
The prices are good, but it's sad that this had to happen for it to get to this, you know?
A good example of this is 2008. In 2008, the economy was terrible, right? Everything had been crashing, and velocity was plummeting. Now, in fact, it kind of continued to go down over the next 10 years, and again during the pandemic, but come back to that in another video. V was plummeting in 2008. People were begging for prices to go down. They needed it. They couldn't afford their homes. They couldn't afford rent. They could barely afford. 40% of people's net worth was lost in 2008. Okay, that is extremely significant. People lost a lot of wealth in 2008. What they needed was the price of everything from homes to cars to gasoline to food to go down. But the government wouldn't let it. So they pumped in a tremendous amount of M into the system to counteract it. This is through bailouts and other things. Now, quick side note on bailouts. Bailouts didn't help you. Okay, bailouts were not for you. Bailouts saved dying companies. But for just a second, let's look at a company like Delta. Okay, Delta, let's say Delta has 1 million planes. Okay, there is no way Delta has 1 million planes. Let's say Delta has 100,000 planes. Okay, let's say Delta has 1,000 planes. There is a computer right in front of me. Delta has 989 planes. If Delta goes out of business, those 989 planes don't disappear. Okay, the people that ran Delta into the ground, the people who made bad investments and took on too much debt, lose the company. They bear the responsibility and the consequences for the company going out of business, as they should. But a bailout means that you bore the responsibility. You paid for Delta to stay not open, but in the hands of these managers, these executives, these CEOs, who are the ones that bankrupted it in the first place. But if there was no bailout, what would happen is somebody else who had a lot of money in his hand, somebody else who had made good decisions with their money and had the cash, would go and buy those 989 planes. And they would assume the debt and the liabilities of Delta at pennies on the dollar. So instead of 100% of the debt that Delta owed, the new managers would come in and get those planes for, say, 50% of the debt. The banks make a deal in bankruptcy and they sell the debt for pennies on the dollar to the new managers. So all that would have happened is Delta would have been rebranded. The pilots and the flight attendants wouldn't even have lost their jobs in the long term, maybe short term, and then they would have been hired back by the new managers who would have come in. Managers who had not just bankrupted their company would have come in and assumed the debt for 50% of the cost, which would have allowed them to lower your prices. But instead, what a bailout did is load up Delta with more liability. So instead of cutting the debt in half and putting it under new management, you keep the same management that ran it into the ground and then increase the debt load. Okay, the government bailed out Chevy, but if they didn't bail out Chevy, somebody else would have come in and bought those factories and started making cars under a new brand with much, much less debt. That would mean cheaper cars for you, cheaper plane tickets.
Thanks, Obama.
The bailouts counteracted the deflation that the public was crying for through declining velocity, at the benefit of the managers who had mismanaged it and at the direct expense of you, the taxpayer. And now you are paying higher prices for both cars and plane tickets than you would have if there was no bailout. Bailouts were not for you. The last type of deflation we're going to talk about is Q deflation. Okay, this is quantity of goods deflation, and this is good all the time. This is what we want. As the economy gets more productive, prices should come down. As we build more cars, more homes, more airplanes, the price of these things come down. That's what happens naturally. That's what happens in a free market. And this type of deflation is always good. And if you don't believe me, Look at the electronics market. Okay. Look at computers, laptops, and electronics. We have this thing called Moore's Law, right? That electronics and computing power, they double in power and get cut in half in price every 2 years. Electronics, laptops, computers, this is a deflationary market already. It always has been. For 50 years, the price per unit of computing power has gone down all the time. Because of Q, it's the quantity is going up. The quality of the products is going up. There is more computing power available on the market all the time. And that drives prices down. So it's not like deflation, even though we haven't seen it economy-wide in 80 years, we see it in electronics right now. And it's a beautiful thing. We see this in electronics and computers every day, okay? And as far as I can tell, Tokyo hasn't burned to the ground. Q deflation is a good thing for you. It is the reason that for $30 a month, you can get a supercomputer in your pocket that is more powerful than any computer on Earth 25 years ago. This is Q deflation, and it's a beautiful thing. Now that we've covered the different types of deflation, let's cover 3 major arguments you hear against it. The 3 arguments we're going to talk about is that deflation caused the Great Depression, that deflation causes people to stop buying things because they know they can get them cheaper later, and that deflation makes it impossible for companies to make money and stay in business as their prices continue to fall. Let's take these one at a time. The first argument is that deflation caused the Great Depression. No, it did not. We're going to do an entire video on the Great Depression because there's a lot of bad economics that comes from people's lack of knowledge about the Great Depression. But essentially, the Great Depression was caused by the 15 years that led up to the Depression, both the monetary and fiscal policies of the 15 years prior to 1929. Deflation was the unwinding of a bunch of really bad policies over the course of 15 years that were never going to be sustainable. Again, like V-deflation, it was a symptom, not a cause. But again, stay tuned. There will be a video on the Great Depression soon for the 8 of you that care about the Great Depression. Next, we have this idea that when prices are falling, people will stop buying things because they know they'll be cheaper in the future. This should work both ways, okay? Does anybody watching this go out and buy 5 years of toothpaste at the same time because you know toothpaste is going to be more expensive in 5 years than it is now? No, people don't really do that. Do you wait to buy a laptop when you need a laptop because you know that in a year you'll get one that's twice as powerful for half the price? But no, when you need a laptop, you buy a laptop, okay? This is how people work. When you need gas, you buy gas. When you need food, you buy food. Nope. Who are these people that are sitting around like, well, you know, if I just wait 2 weeks, I could really eat breakfast for half the price? No, eat breakfast, dumbass, you're hungry. That's what people do. You don't refuse to buy a new iPhone just because you know there's going to be a better one for the same price next year. This is not how people work. This is fear-mongering. The last argument is the one that companies can't stay open, that a bunch of companies would all go under if there was deflation. Again, there is no evidence of this. The only truly deflationary market we have in the US, again, is electronics. Constantly deflationary, but Apple's killing it. Okay, IBM is doing just fine. These companies aren't going down in business. Entrepreneurs and business owners, their job, fundamentally, the job of a business owner in any sector is to be able to predict demand patterns in the near future. That's what they do. If you can't understand or predict accurately what your customers will want, then you don't stay open very, very long.
What kind of idiots do you have working here?
Okay, look, if there's 15 or 20% deflation in a year because M plummets for some reason or V plummets because there's a housing, if something like that happens, okay, you're right. A lot of companies are going to go out of business because like inflation, deflation is not good if there's a ton of it and it's sudden and unexpected. But any company who cannot stay open with 2 to 3 to 4% deflation year over year should not stay open. And I promise you, most of their competitors are. And the reason is that the inputs, the commodities that go into making products will also go down. If your car goes down in price because there's general deflation in the economy, I promise you a big part of it is because the aluminum is going down in price. The tin, the palladium they make the converter out of, the leather they make the seats out of, all of these commodities, all of these inputs are also going down. Remember our part 3 of inflation series where we talked about the producer price index and how that actually went up faster than the consumer price index officially. It's the same thing in deflation. Companies put the same pressure on their suppliers, the suppliers of their commodities, of their inputs. They put that pressure on them too to lower prices, and they lower together. If your company can't survive 3% deflation year over year, you don't deserve to stay in business. And again, you don't have to look any farther than electronics companies. Electronics and technology companies are some of the most successful, largest, most growth-oriented companies on the planet. And that entire industry is deflationary. As we touched on in an earlier video and at the beginning of this video, I'm not saying deflation is perfect or great at all times for all people. But it is better for the poor and retirees than inflation is. And as long as it's low and predictable, it is generally a good thing. But remember, it was the time in this country of the freest market, where we had deflation between the Civil War and 1913. This was a deflationary period, and it was the period of the largest, fastest growth in U.S. history, particularly for the middle class and for the poor. They saw more productivity gains in that period than they have in the 120 years since. Deflation drove the largest, fastest growth in American history. Deflation drove us to an industrial power, to a world power. When you hear somebody tell you to be afraid of it, stop listening to that person. That about wraps up this episode. I appreciate you joining me. If you have any questions, I encourage you to put them in the comments. My audience is small enough still right now that I have the time to look at them and answer them. But if you enjoyed yourself, please like and subscribe. Most importantly, share this with your friends. These conversations aren't going to be had on television. Your children aren't going to be taught this in school because the system is run by people who benefit from inflation at your expense and you benefit from deflation at their expense. So get out there and start a conversation. If you need a little conversation starter, head on over to antitanktops.com. Get you some provocative deflationary swag and get a conversation started. I appreciate y'all joining me again. Until next time, this is Econ and Decon signing out. Peace.